Please join me in welcoming Dr. Patrick Laflèche. He is originally from Hearst, Ontario, a small francophone town in Northern Ontario, and his journey has been anything but ordinary. He studied the arts and languages in England, has taught sex education in Nunavut, worked as a hydrology technician on a remote island, and eventually has found his way to medicine. So very up and down there. Since then, he's practiced family medicine in rural BC, volunteered abroad with Médecins Sans Frontières, and has trained as a surgeon in Saskatchewan. Currently, he lives and works in Inuvik as a GP surgeon and is a family man, surrounded by his partner Teresa, daughter Soleil, and their dog Juno. Today, Patrick is here to share Screwing Up with Dignity, sharing some lessons on how embracing our mistakes can help us grow together. So everybody use the chat to give a warm welcome to Dr. Patrick Laflèche.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Nani, for the nice introduction. I'm just going to make sure I can actually share my presentation with you guys. Give me 1 second. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. Good, yes. As Nani said, I'm here to give the keynote lecture for you guys, and it's an honor to be here. I really hope all of you have a really wonderful day and feel inspired by the end of it. When I was asked to do this a few months ago, I kind of gave some thought to how I wanted to approach it. And my main goals were to not bore you to death, for one, and hopefully maybe be a little inspiring, and ideally make you laugh a little bit as well. A little bit of housekeeping for myself as well. You're going to see lots of beautiful scenery pictures during this presentation, and they are all courtesy of a very talented local photographer here in Inuvik named Christian Binder. And I did ask for his permission to share these, and he was very enthusiastic in me doing so. You'll also see some other pictures that are of colleagues, of patients, and of my family, and everyone was photographed in those pictures gave their consent for sharing for teaching purposes, which is what this is really. I had asked the organizer ahead of time, where is everyone from that I'm talking to? I understand that there's people joining us from BC, from Alberta, from the Yukon, and I think a couple of people from the Northwest Territories and from Inuvik. And I'm also told that there's a few people joining us from Ontario, which is where I'm from. So welcome, everyone. How I'm going to approach this? Well, I guess I'm not doing it that differently than most people would. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own personal journey, getting through medicine and my training and to where I am today. But I'm going to do it with some good dose of self-deprecation, balanced with some vanity. It's always nice to talk about yourself. And then there's going to be a couple of very gratuitous educational tangents because I just can't help myself. A little bit of a land acknowledgement, because I do think it is important to do that. I'm talking to you guys from Inuvik, which is located on the traditional territory of both the Inuvialuit and the Gwich'in. And I have the privilege and the pleasure of working and serving Gwich'in and Inuvialuit people on a day-to-day basis and sharing in their language, their culture, and the land that they call home. I'm a guy that wears a few hats or has worn a few hats over the years. Yep, I'm a doctor and a surgeon here in Inuvik. I'm also a member of our local ranger patrol. I've been a volunteer with MSF in the past, and I'm a dad as well to a rambunctious 2-year-old. It wasn't always this way. I was at some point a child as well, and I was born and raised in Hearst, as Nani said. It's a small logging community in Northern Ontario. pretty blue collar, also extremely francophone, and French is my first language. So if I say anything that doesn't make sense, we'll just blame it on that. Yeah, I did all my schooling there. So born and raised in a very rural community. This is my mandatory embarrassing high school picture. I think this is grade 10, although I didn't totally confirm that. You'll notice the very Harry Potter-like glasses, which is very early 2000s. And then the chain as well, the steel chain around the neck. Yeah, very classy. You can tell I didn't hit puberty until much, much later than most of my peers, but I still turned out okay, at least I like to think so. I have a little bit of Western Canada cred, even though I'm not originally from here. I ended up doing my family medicine training in BC, in Prince George. And then I also did my surgical training in Saskatchewan. So I lived in both those provinces. And right now, of course, I live in the Northwest Territories in Inuvik, way up there. I've spent a lot of time as well traveling and recreating in the Yukon and Alberta, even though I haven't actually lived there. Not yet, anyways. So this is where I'm talking to you from now. This is Inuvik. It's a small town located on the edge of the Beaufort Delta, which is the river delta where the Mackenzie River joins the ocean. It's a nice little place. It's not huge. It's 3,500 people thereabouts. It's mostly an Indigenous community. And it has a beautiful little hospital, which is where I work most of the time. Our hospital does what a lot of small town hospitals do. They do emergency care. They also do run clinics for patients, just regular doctors' clinics and nurses' clinics. We also take care of patients that are too sick to be out in the community and run an inpatient ward. We deliver babies, probably about 100 a year, a little bit less these days. And we have an operating room. And this is our little OR. This is where I like to say that all the magic happens and where a lot of my time is taken up. And actually, that's where I was this morning. That's why I'm still wearing scrubs. I just had a case and had to run back to talk to you guys. And that's me with one of my colleagues, Dr. Jean, who actually was a doctor in my hometown when I was in med school. And she came up recently to have a little visit and work with us. As Nanny said, and as I mentioned before, I also have a bit of a side gig working with our Ranger Patrol. So I'm just a regular patrol member. And right now I'm doing second in command kind of work, which means organizing things for our members. That means that I attend some monthly meetings, which are not necessarily all that exciting, but it also means that I get to participate in some really cool expeditions. So we go check out our local radar sites to make sure that they're safe and secured. And then we also work alongside the regular armed forces on longer expeditions. And we get to travel to pretty neat places. This is from a trip where we went from Inuvik all the way up the coast to a place called Herschel Island, which is an old whaling station that is the most northern part of the Yukon. And of course, my real full-time job, which is 24/7, is being a dad and being a partner. So this is my daughter, Soleil. She's just over 2 now, and my partner, Teresa, who herself is a really incredible individual. She's also a doctor and does anesthesia. So we work in the operating room a lot together. And of course, judo. Because we live in such a beautiful place and a place that's really connected to the land, we like to spend a lot of time on the land. This is Teresa and I out on a hike in the fall, looking for ptarmigan and just enjoying the fall colors. Berry picking is one of the harvesting activities that we like to do the most as a family. So this is Soleil at age 1 picking cloudberries, which up here we would call ukpicks or knuckles. You can tell Teresa was being attacked by mosquitoes, and mysteriously Soleil was not, even though she was fully exposed. I also grew up hunting with my dad, and I try to go out moose hunting every year. And this is a bull that I harvested a couple of years ago. And there's so much space and wildlife around that it's relatively easy for me to do that, which is really nice. And I get to keep the freezer full too. So, I mean, I think my life is pretty great. I'm not sure if you guys agree, but some of you might be wondering, like, you've done all these things. You have such a full, rich life. What's your secret? What did you do to achieve what you did? Sorry to disappoint, but there's not really much of a secret. I really like what I'm going to try to convince you guys of is that I'm more or less a regular guy. I've worked hard on certain things in my life, but I've also screwed up a lot, like everyone else. And so what I'm going to do from here on is I'm going to tell you a bit of my story of my journey through medicine by giving you by sort of focusing on three mishaps that happened to me over the years and the lessons I learned from them. So there's going to be three stories. I'm going to set the scene a little bit and give you some background, talk about what happened, and then the main life lesson that I learned from those screw-ups. So my first story is called Blueberry Crisp for reasons that will soon become obvious. So this takes place back in 2014. At the time, I had freshly graduated medical school. I had gone to med school in Ottawa and matched to my residency program in BC. I decided that I wanted to be a family doctor, and specifically, I wanted to do rural medicine. I wanted to work in a small town. And Prince George had a great program for that. So I spent my first year in Prince George. I worked in all the different main rotations that we were meant to. And then in my second year, I got to pick 2 rural communities where I would rotate for 4 months each. And in these communities, that's where I was really going to lock in kind of my practice and my ability as a rural family doctor. And the first community I went to was in Nuvik, which is how I first came up here. And this was my room that I got to stay in for 4 months. It's nothing fancy. It's kind of a dorm room scenario. You can tell that there's no kitchen. So unless I wanted to just microwave everything, I had to walk down the hall to the common area kitchen to do anything like that. Most days while I was a resident in Inuvik, I looked like this. I was working really long hours. I was on call a lot, delivering babies. I was working a lot of nights in the emergency department. And I was really enjoying it, but I was also pushing myself. I felt like I didn't have a lot of time to get the training I needed. And I was really trying to get as much exposure as I could during my training. So I was doing a lot. I also wanted to enjoy what the community and the area had to offer. So on top of working a lot, I was also trying to do a lot of community activities. And that's kind of where this story starts, is I had gone out with a community group to go berry picking because it was fall time and late fall time, and there were lots of blueberries about. And I picked a bunch of blueberries. The blueberries kind of sat in my fridge for a while because I didn't have time to do much. And then one day after I'd been up all night delivering babies and working in the emergency department, I got home, and instead of going to sleep, I said, well, I've got some time. Why don't I just make a pie? So I went to the kitchen. I started making my pie. And then, of course, I was interrupted. So my pager went off. And it wasn't a regular page. I was being paged with a code blue. And a code blue, if you don't know, is a code that means that there's a patient that's either actively dying or is incredibly sick, and that it's a all hands on deck scenario. Everyone who gets the page should show up, try to help out because it's going to be a difficult situation. So I ran to the hospital, which was just across the parking lot, and into our trauma bay, which looks like this. And you can imagine that in this trauma bay I ran in, and so did many other doctors and nurses. There were about 15 of us in there, so pretty packed. And a gentleman was brought in by ambulance. He was an older man. He was very big. And he, what had happened is we think that he had some kind of a health issue, and possibly a heart attack or a stroke. And he stopped his vehicle by the side of the highway and then collapsed on the ground. And because this was fall time and there was starting to get a bit of snow on the ground, it was cold. He wasn't fully dressed. And when people got to him and got him out, he was quite cold. So he was suffering from hypothermia. And if you know anything about hypothermia, you'll know that it has an effect on all the body systems. So on the brain, it will cause confusion when it's very mild, but when it's more severe, you're actually going to completely pass out and fall into a coma. And that's what happened to this man. So he wasn't responsive. It also has a lot of effects on your circulatory system. So your blood vessels will contract, but if it gets more severe, your heart rate can get irregular. And that's also what was happening with this man, is his heart was starting and stopping. We were having to do chest compressions, and then we were having to also administer shocks to try to restart it. All the while, what we're trying to do is rewarm him, because we know that that's one of the main problems with his body system at that point, which is hard to do with a very large person. And so we had all sorts of ways of trying to do that. And we knew that it was important to give it our best shot, because there is a saying in medicine that says, You are not dead until you're warm and dead. And that's because we know that people who have hypothermia, even when it seems like all their body systems are shut down, if you're able to rewarm them, some of them actually have a remarkably good recovery. So we gave it our best shot. We were working on this patient for about 6 hours nonstop. It was a long case. Unfortunately, we weren't able to resuscitate him completely, and we stopped after 6 hours. So it wasn't a happy ending in that sense, and that's kind of the mood that I was in when I went home. I was exhausted. I was a little bit discouraged and sad, right? And I went home and I passed out, and I probably slept for about 14 hours. What I didn't know is that there was another tragedy unfolding in the background. So this is the common area kitchen where I was making my pie. And as part of my recipe, I had to cook down the blueberries. It was just one of those things where you had to cook the filling first and put it in the pie shell. And I had left it on the burner, not realizing it. And you can imagine that some blueberries cooking for 6 hours is not going to do anything good. They dried out, they started to char, and eventually they caught fire, as you can see in this advanced, AI generated image. So the kitchen filled with smoke. Things could have gotten really bad, and that building certainly could have burned down pretty easily. Thankfully, there was a nurse that was staying in the residence that happened to be walking out of her room when this was unfolding. She saw all this thick black smoke coming out of the kitchen, and so she ran in. She had the good sense to pick up the pot with a towel, throw it in the sink, and open the windows to air things out. I was completely oblivious to all this because I was running this code in the hospital, and by the time I got back home, all the smoke had cleared out. So it wasn't until the next day that she told me this story. She didn't know who had done this, and I was like, "Oh my God, that was me. That was me. I almost burned down the residence." I felt really bad. You can see I've been doing a little bit too much D&D here. I felt really bad. I felt like I was this negligent, terrible person who couldn't even remember to take something off the burner. Shouldn't be allowed to practice medicine, obviously, because of it. I was not in a good place. And probably that felt worse because I was so tired too. But after a few days, I talked to my colleagues, and some people tried to laugh it off with me, and I talked to my family, who were very supportive. And I came to a bit of a realization. I realized that ultimately, all of this had happened because I wasn't being very kind to myself. I wasn't really giving myself the space that I needed, the respecting the limits of what I was able to do. I was pushing myself too hard. And I reflected on this a lot, and I really took this lesson to heart. I think I had been burning myself out a little bit in that first rotation of my residency. For the rest of the year, I actually slowed down a little bit, which was a good thing. I was able to finish my family medicine training and didn't have any further issues and passed my exams and all that. And then I went into practice. For a couple of years, I worked as a locum in Vancouver, Northern BC, and in the Northwest Territories, until eventually I decided that I really liked working in Inuvik quite a lot, and I wanted to settle in there and sign a contract. So I bought this double wide trailer and settled into my new life, and that was that. So at the time, I was working mostly doing regular GP stuff. So I was delivering babies, but also working in the emergency department and clinics. And I didn't burn any more pies or buildings. Life was pretty good. But I did feel like I wanted to do a little bit of something more, which kind of takes off a little bit to my second story. I had heard about Médecins Sans Frontières when I was in school, so in high school. And they're an aid organization that works across the world, primarily in places where there is otherwise no healthcare. So often it's conflict zones, so war zones, or places that have suffered really severe natural disasters. They go in and they run clinics and provide health services. I really admired this organization. I wanted to work with them. So while I was working in Inuvik, I applied and I got accepted. It was a bit of a process. It took about a year to go through everything, and including some training that I did in Germany. But I did get accepted, and I got matched to my very first project. And so that's where our second story starts. And I call it cucumber salad for reasons that will be obvious. There's a bit of a food theme there. My mission with MSF, my first one, was in a country called South Sudan, which is, I think, still the newest country in the world. Also very unstable country. At the time, there was some active conflict between government and non-government forces. And I was to be stationed in a town called Bentiu, which is sort of a medium-sized a city in the north of the country. And our goal in Bentiu was to support a region that was south of us that was isolated because of the fighting lines, because of where the fighting forces were, and to fly in and run health activities to help support the local population. So pretty cool project. The very first thing that we were doing once I landed and got involved is we were trying to run a vaccination campaign, to start a vaccination campaign. We knew that there were all these kids who were living in this isolated region that we were supporting who hadn't been vaccinated in 5 years. And one of the diseases that could run like wildfire through a population like that was measles, and there had been some outbreaks in the country. And so we were trying to scramble to get in there and run a vaccination campaign to vaccinate as many kids as possible. So it's a lot of organization to do that. You have to imagine that we're flying in vaccines. We have to keep those vaccines refrigerated in places that doesn't have electricity. We also have to think about safety because there are some armed groups that are fighting in the area. So not an easy task. It took weeks of work for me and my team to kind of work on a good plan and set it into motion. But we finally did make it out and got to our first vaccination site. And we ran a good, successful vaccination day, as you can see there, lots of kids, and got lots of kids their shots. And so we were winding down at the end of the day. This was our very basic campsite. That's what a lot of MSF looks like. It's nothing glamorous. And we were lucky that day because one of the planes carrying vaccines had come in and brought us dinner. So we didn't actually have to cook. Dinner had been prepared for us back at home base and was brought in containers. So we sat down to eat. And one of the dishes that was there was a cucumber salad, which looked really good. I'm not sure why none of my colleagues tried it, but I had seconds and I thought it was quite delicious. And that was that. And I went to bed and actually fell asleep. And then I woke up a couple of hours later with crippling abdominal pains. And you'll hear the term food poisoning a lot. It's not really a medical term, but there's different reactions you can get to eating contaminated food. And what had happened to me was probably a toxin type reaction, and most likely from an organism called Staphylococcus. So staphylococci are a bacteria, and one of the things they can do is produce toxins. So it probably had gotten on this cucumber salad, had released a bunch of toxin. I ate salad, including the toxin, and then the toxin reacted to my body a few hours later. So I experienced severe nausea, vomiting, lots of sweats. I felt like garbage. I had violent abdominal cramps and terrible watery diarrhea, which I realize is too much information, but there it is. This was the latrine that I had access to. It's not actually, but it's about similar to what I remember. It's not glorious. It's not the most hygienic, but it's something. It kind of threw me off too because I'd been hearing stories throughout the day about how there had been snakes hiding in it. And the staff or the local staff that we were supporting had kind of warned us to kind of make some noise before you go in there to make sure the snakes get out. Anyways, I didn't see any snakes. I spent a lot of time at this latrine pit over the course of that night, playing that fun guessing game of which end is it going to come out of next, until my body was completely empty. In the morning, I felt like absolute garbage. My team was like, hey, you're getting out. And they sent me back to the capital base just to recover. I felt really awful about this whole experience. I felt like I was a total fraud. I'd spent so many months, applying, preparing for this trip, trying to be as ready as possible. And then finally I was getting out on the field in this project that we worked so hard to organize. And then like first day, I'd make myself really sick by eating a salad and I get out. It was pretty pathetic. Again, I had really good supportive colleagues who were able to make me laugh about it. And my family also was really great. Only took me a couple of days to feel like I was feeling better again. And I didn't get too discouraged, and I decided that the best thing to do was to get right back into it. And the lesson that I was trying to teach myself at the time was that I was probably taking myself a little bit too seriously there, trying to be this doctor going to work with MSF, saving the world in my own little small way. It's too much pressure, right? Ultimately, I'm just a regular guy trying to do his best, probably in over his head sometimes. The reality is I was working in a tropical setting, which means that gastrointestinal illness is a common occurrence. And I wasn't the only one who's gotten sick, and it wouldn't be the first time or the last. So I went back and we finished our vaccination project. We treated lots of patients on the side while we were vaccinating people. This is us resuscitating a woman who had a very severe infection from a miscarriage that we were trying to get out on a plane. And I ended up having a really successful mission. So I stayed for my full 4 months, and then I extended by another month and a half, just because I was really enjoying it. And I got to be involved with lots of different projects across the country, actually, and had a really good time. I still have a lot of fond memories from my time with MSF, and I made lots of good friends. This is my buddy Joseph, who's a clinical officer there. And I try to stay in touch with them. And I do hope in the future I'll get to work with that organization again. And that's about that for that second story. After I finished with MSF, I went back to Inuvik, and me being me, I decided that I needed to take on another project, and I decided that I wanted to train as a surgeon. So I applied and got accepted to a program in Prince Albert, and this is the Victoria Hospital in Prince Albert that you see here. And I spent a lot of time in that building for about a year learning to do all kinds of surgeries, and got my training. So I went back to Inuvik. And suddenly I was a surgeon in Inuvik, and that meant that I was supporting our obstetrics program by doing cesarean sections. I was doing endoscopy, so colonoscopies, gastroscopies, and also doing other fun surgeries like hernia repairs and carpal tunnel releases, all sorts of cool things. And this takes me to my final story. I'll call it Eye Opener. As part of my work as a surgeon and as a doctor in Inuvik, I was doing a lot of teaching. Just like I had been a resident in Inuvik, there were other people that continued to come and are still coming now who are learners, residents and students. And we spent a lot of time with them, rotating through different parts of the hospital and getting them to work and some hands-on experience. One of my residents is Samia, or was Samia. She's actually currently a family doctor in BC, but at the time, she was my resident. And Samia spent, I think, a solid 4 months with us in Inuvik. One day we were working in the emergency department together, and we were seeing a bunch of different people. There was a gentleman that came in who was having some eye problems, and so he couldn't see quite clearly. He had a bit of blurry vision. And one of the things that I told Samia that we should check was his eye pressure. And there's different ways of doing that. But one of the ways that we check eye pressure is with something called a tonopen, which is this little device. It's very simple. Basically, it has a little button on the end, and you have to tap it against the front of the eye, the colored part of the eye, and then it gives you a pressure reading. Now, of course, the eye is very sensitive, and you can't do that unless you first numb the eye. So you have to use a solution called tetracaine and put a few drops in someone's eye to numb it before you actually do the measurement. So when I got the device out and showed it to Sammy and said, okay, you can go and get the pressure, she said, well, actually, I haven't actually used this thing before. Can you show me how? And he said, well, yeah, like, why don't we just do a bit of hands-on practice? You can numb my eye, and then you can test it on me. She said, oh, that sounds great. So she got the tetracaine drops. She came back. She put some drops in my eye. And then she was trying to get a pressure, but it felt really sensitive. Like my eye wasn't really numbing properly. And I felt like something was a little off here. And I was like, I don't know, do you need to put more drops in? Like, what's going on? She just thought I was being a real wimp. Eventually, she got fed up with me and just said, well, why don't you just do it to me? And I said, okay, fine. So I put some drops in her eyes. Same thing, just couldn't get it to work. And then we looked down and we realized our mistake. So these are 2 drops. The top one is a tetracaine that we were looking for. And the bottom one is something called atropine. And in our little tray that we have for eye examinations, and these 2 drops are right next to each other. And you can see that they look pretty similar, but they actually work very differently. So the top one is just a numbing agent that lasts a couple of hours and then wears off. The bottom one is atropine is a very different agent. So it's a medication that when you put it in the eye blocks off the parasympathetic nervous system. And what it ends up doing is it causes the pupil to dilate, to open way up. And that's a very useful thing if you're an eye doctor and you need to look at the back of the eye. It doesn't help if you're trying to numb the eye. So clearly it wasn't working. when we realized that we did this to ourselves, we were like, oh crap, this isn't good. And the reason it isn't good is that when your eye gets dilated, this is an actual picture of Samia at the time. Your pupil gets way too big, which looks kind of funky. You look like an anime character. But it also lets too much light in, and your retina, the back of your eye, can't actually process what's going on. Your brain can't process what's going on, and you get really blurry vision, and you can't really see anything. So we had to leave the emergency department because we couldn't keep working. That night we were texting each other. These are real excerpts from our texts. We had to do everything in caps, and we had to magnify things on our phone. It wasn't good. We were hoping that it would resolve overnight. No, we had overdosed ourselves so much that it took about 7 days before our vision actually went back to normal. So a full week. In that time, we couldn't work. I had to cancel my operating rooms. It was pretty embarrassing, also really funny. This is what Samia looked like. This was the only way she could actually read things is if she doubled up her glasses. I guess she had 2 sets. Yeah. I didn't beat myself up too badly about this one. I guess I just had a little bit more maturity as a professional, and I realized that, like, okay, it happened. Like, there's no point crying about it. It was funny, but I did actually feel very responsible and a bit of a failure to Samia because she was my learner. I was her preceptor, her teacher, and I had kind of let this happen. I ended up again like talking to a lot of my colleagues who, in between laughing at us, were like very lovely and supportive. And the lesson that I kind of took away from this is something that I already knew about, but really reinforced for me, and it's Swiss cheese. The Swiss cheese model is something that we use in healthcare to talk about how adverse events happen. So basically in healthcare, like if something goes wrong, it's basically never because of one single point of failure or one individual or one thing that was done. It's because there's many things that actually went wrong to allow this to happen in the first place. And in this case, like, okay, 100%, we should have read the label of those drops before we put it in our own eyes. That's really, really, really basic and really dumb. However, the fact that 2 very similar looking drops that were very different were being kept next to each other without any clear labels was also a bit of a problem, right? And the fact is that atropine is almost never used in the emergency department, so they had no business being in there in the first place. And that was actually corrected after we had our little eye episode. So that was that. We actually recovered our vision, and I was able to go back to work, and Samia was able to finish her residency without any issue. And we still laugh about this. We were just texting when I was preparing for this presentation and reminiscing. I'm still working as a GP surgeon here. I didn't get fired because of this or any of my other mistakes, which is good. And I still make mistakes all the time. At work, but also at my side job as a ranger. This is from a recent expedition that we did where we went over mountains in the Yukon. And it looks really cool, and I look like, like I'm very competent, but what you don't see is all the times that I got stuck and flipped my skidoo and needed some help from my fellow rangers to get me out. And there's a saying in surgery that one of my colleagues likes to say. It goes, you cut, you cry. Simple as that. And what it means to convey is that if you're doing surgical procedures, invariably you're going to have some complications. Things are going to go wrong, right? And that's just a fact of life, and you have to deal with it. And it's less about whether or not it happens to you, because it will. It's more about how you pick yourself up and learn from your mistakes and move on. And I would add to that too, that it's also about how you're able to laugh about it and laugh at yourself a little bit too. I think about this a lot when I think about my daughter. She's only 2. She obviously is learning about the world for the first time and making all sorts of mistakes every day, but we don't really think about it that way. We just think about it as learning. And I think that's true for all of us. And that same kind of understanding and compassion that we show young people, we should probably show to ourselves and to each other. And I hope you guys do that. Obviously, some mistakes are bigger than others, and the ones I presented to you today are things that ultimately, turned out okay. It's not always like that, but I think in any situation, there's always something to learn from things that go wrong in our lives. I'm about to start an exciting new chapter. My partner Teresa is pregnant. We're going to have a baby in March, so it's very exciting. I'm sure that as a parent too, I've already had lots of humbling moments and situations, and there's going to be more of those. And life is going to get a little more hectic, but I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. So I think I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for listening in. I really hope you guys have a wonderful day today. If your lives and your careers take you into healthcare, then good for you. Make the most of it. Enjoy your time and embrace all the mistakes that you make. And if you end up doing anything else, then I mean the same applies really. So yeah, I don't know if we have any time for kind of questions and stuff, but I'll let Nani take over.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We're over here not laughing at you, but with you in some of those moments. So I know it takes a lot of vulnerability to show your mistakes and admit them. But obviously, you came out on the other side with all of those. And honestly, those are just honest mistakes, right? That's part of life. But I did see a couple of questions. We have about 5 more minutes before the session ends. One of the questions, there was actually quite a bit of, I don't know if you could see the chat, but there was quite a bit of chatter in there. One question that people had was, do you eat cucumbers now?
Nah. I love cucumbers. Actually, my not my favorite, but my most common way of eating cucumbers nowadays is half-eaten cucumbers that my daughter rejects halfway through. Okay. So they're kind of warm, a little mushy and soggy. Perfect.
That sounds amazing.
If I can eat those, then like, yeah, that incident definitely did turn me off of cucumbers.
Yeah,
I don't know if I've had cucumber salad since then, though.
Since then? Okay. I mean, understandable, yeah. There was another question here about your experience when you were being a technician, but it was quite far up, so I can't find it anymore. But do you have any other than what you've shared already of just like kind of giving yourself a little bit of grace and, knowing that you're going to make a mistake?
I see a couple of things. I see a couple of things that I want to answer maybe. So one is just a typical day, right? So I didn't really go into detail about like what my days are usually like. But just to give you an example. So like today, what I'm doing is this morning I went in, I had some surgery to do. So I had a carpal tunnel to open, so a wrist surgery to do. And then I have a couple of scopes to do after that. So colonoscopies, gastroscopies on patients. And then I'm on call, so there's a couple of patients that I have to go see on the ward. One of them is a child that has a hernia on her belly that I'm going to look at. And then I have a few hours to just do some admin. And then this evening, I'm taking over the emergency department for my partner, Teresa. So I'll be seeing patients in the ER overnight. My days are every day a little different. So sometimes I work emergency department overnight. Sometimes I run clinics. Sometimes I do phone clinics. Sometimes we do community visits to like some of the surrounding communities. So it's extremely varied, which is like typical for when you're a GP. I also saw a question about what rangers are like and what rangers actually are. Yeah. So if those of you who live and work in rural communities will know about the rangers a little bit. You're basically, if you're a ranger, you're a reservist. So you work with the armed forces and you're technically like in the armed forces reserve. You would never actually get called up to go to war or anything. But our job is to do some sovereignty work in our communities. We end up doing a little bit of search and rescue sometimes if there's no one else, or to support search and rescue teams. But we're kind of like meant to be the eyes and ears of the military in the north. And so we're meant to have some expertise about how to navigate so that, say, for example, there was a big emergency or for some reason the armed forces had to come into where we are, they would come talk to us to be like, hey, we want to go from here to here. Here's how we're going to do it. And we can say, no, you're not, because that river is not frozen. This area is impassable. You can't go that way. Here's where you have to go, kind of thing, right? So it's kind of a supportive part of the armed forces. It's really cool. It's really fun work.
That's awesome. Actually, I think we just have time for one more question, but I saw one that is about squeamishness and like, is there like, did you ever deal with?
Oh my God, okay. I should have told you guys this story too, but I just didn't have time. Okay, so very quickly, I was like, when I was a medical student, second year, I went back to my hometown. And I was invited to go to the operating room for a C-section. And it turns out it was someone that I didn't know very well, but had gone to high school with me. And they were fine with me being in there and stuff. And I was just a student. So I was like holding retractors and like not really that involved. We got the baby out. I kind of imagined that a C-section was this nice, clean procedure. No, it's not. It's bloody. There's body fluids everywhere. It's a bit of a mess. So once the baby was out, the surgeon had me put my hand inside the womb to feel, and that did it for me. I passed out hard. I knocked my head on the table.
Oh.
I like fell on the ground. They dragged me onto the hallway. I passed out a second time.
Oh, no.
my dad, who was a small town doc himself, came and picked me up, and he was so ashamed. He was just like, "Oh my god, you're gonna have to be a psychiatrist or something." Like,
Okay.
So, all that to say that it's pretty normal to be squeamish about surgery, about blood, about like body fluids, whether they're your own or others. It's a natural reaction. Some people are more sensitive than others. It's not insurmountable at all. You get used to anything, okay? And if you love it, it doesn't really matter. Just keep doing it. You know, there's a couple of times after that episode where I had to excuse myself because I felt like it was coming on a little bit, but then eventually I just got over it. And now I do those surgeries myself, and it doesn't bother me.
Okay, so for those of you who are considering a career in health and you're a bit squeamish, it's possible, but I think it's a little bit of what's it called when you have a phobia, like exposure therapy.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of exposure for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, medicine's a bit like that in general. When you go through your training, I mean, most healthcare, same with nursing. Like, there's a lot of things that can normally make you squeamish, and then you just do tons, and yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for answering some of the student questions. We do have to get going now because there's a little bit of a break. So I'm just going to share my screen again really quick just to show the schedule. All right, so right now we went a little bit over, so there's a little bit of a break until for the next 5 minutes or so. Then your first workshop will start. So everybody, if you just click on the lobby section and then your workshop, it'll have a button that says join now, just like you did with this session. So once again, I am really grateful to you, Patrick, and to all of the students who joined us this morning. Thank you so much, and have a great day. And we'll see you later at the career panel. All right, bye-bye.